If you want to watch exclusive Naruto Lemon, then you should go to my Boosty. Now there is a 20% discount on 3 level, which is in the description under the video. What will happen if the quarrelsome girl, always going ahead, finally breaking free from everyone's hatred and contempt, returns to the very beginning? What will happen if this girl's best friend, sealed within her since birth, also returns with her? Chapters 44 to 46. Enjoy watching. Chapter 44, Winner. Naruto looked with undisguised admiration at how Gaara's older brother masterfully wielded his puppet, still remaining in its shadow. Honestly, if the blonde didn't know Kankuro's specialization and didn't see the thin, barely noticeable threads of chakra emanating from the puppet's cocoon, then, like most of those present, she would have believed the guy's little performance. Karasa played the role of his master too skillfully. Nara was especially delighted by the way the puppet's neck broke under the pressure of the enemy with a characteristic crunch. At that moment, almost everyone, even the most adult genin, in addition to representatives of Suna, of course, clearly shuddered, finally being clearly convinced of the recent words of the Hokage of the Leaf Village. By the way, to the considerable surprise of Naruto herself, some jonin also stared at the arena in surprise, it seems, truly believing in the death of one of the Kazekage's children. However, if the blonde had not known the whole truth in advance, even seeing the thin threads of chakra and remembering their recent meeting, when Kankuro almost used his puppet, she, to put it mildly, would have been just as shocked by what she saw. But still, the apotheosis of Kankuro's battle deservedly became his unexpected resurrection, which made everyone flinch again, but this time not from surprise and misunderstanding, but from fear. The most impressionable scream in fear. After all, it's not every day that you can see how a completely dead person moves and speaks. Even Neru, thanks to her knowledge, who had expected something like this from the very beginning, twitched slightly, feeling an unpleasant chill, immediately feeling how Kakashi's strong arms pressed her closer to him, still hugging the girl from the back. Although there was also someone who, despite everything that had happened, grinned benevolently in a voice suspiciously familiar to the blonde. The kunoichi glanced around to make sure. Her parent, clearly pleased with the performance, smiled approvingly, not paying any attention to whose son was performing in the arena now. Actually, what happened next was not so interesting and exciting. The guy, in the blink of an eye, freed himself from the dense cocoon of bandages, literally knocked out his shocked opponent in just 1 or 2 attacks, thereby receiving a well-deserved victory in the duel. The stands, realizing what exactly had happened, rained down a storm of applause on the winner, their roar even drowning out Hyde's voice announcing the official end of the fight. Promising young man. A little louder than required so that only the people located nearby could hear him, Minato quite unexpectedly said, looking confidently at the guy standing in the arena. The race can truly be proud of its eldest son, who continues the glorious traditions of shinobi from Suna. Warm enough, he chuckled, remembering how dismissively the Kazekage had waved off his invitation to attend this qualifying tournament to support his children and look at the younger generation of ninja in all their glory. After all, in his opinion, no matter how you look at it, some pathetic 5 final fights could not fully reveal the full potential of the youngsters. Thank you, Hokage-sama. The puppeteer responded with a slight bow. And under the skeptical glances of his younger brother, and the mentor of their team, he hurried to hide from the arena, from where the medical ninjas had already managed to carry away the unconscious body of his opponent. Let's move on to the 4th battle, Hyde immediately said loudly, drawing everyone's attention to the scoreboard, where the nameplates flashed again. Everything around froze in anticipation again, heating the air with tension in anticipation of a new pair of fighters, until the flickering stopped and the black letters finally formed into the names of those who would fight next. Haruno Sakura vs. Yamanaka Ino. The sharp voice of the examiner cut through the deathly silence, clearly making it clear to the girls standing shoulder to shoulder that this was not insanity, and it was really time for them to enter this damn arena. Hey Sakura, good luck! Turning to the surprised girl with her usual smile, she gave Naruto 2 cheerfully, showing a finger up and quietly nudging Sasuke, who was standing on the other side of her, with her elbow. Fight with all your might, Haruno! The Uchiha chuckled dispassionately, looking at his teammate frozen in place with an unreadable face, silently understanding the actions of his best friend. But don't forget that you are great in any case, Hatake said softly, finally releasing the blonde from his arms, and reassuringly placed his hand on the shoulder of the girl who was still surprised by what had happened. The pink-haired girl shuddered in surprise and, blinking measuredly a couple of times, nodded to her mentor, having previously simply refused to believe that Ino would become her opponent. At the same time, she seemed to ignore everything else, missing even the words of her beloved Uchiha. You need to get your act together and show everything you've learned since graduation, Sakura, the man said a little more quietly, looking exactly into the confused eyes of his second student, wanting to cheer her up, while unknowingly interrupting Naruto, who had already opened her mouth to agree with his previous words, causing her to frown slightly. As a result, the blonde remained silent, for some reason feeling a strange desire to support Ino exclusively now. You two are from the same village, and in addition you are also close friends. Imperceptibly wedging into the conversation, the Hokage drawled in a soft, completely uncharacteristic voice, attracting the attention of the girls, again without letting his daughter open her mouth. My advice to you: just treat your battle as a normal training session and give it your all, the blonde said with a warm, fatherly smile, looking at the surprised, slightly blushing faces of the girls, in which determination was clearly visible, clearly seeing that although they were still intuitively resisting the will of fate, they were already completely ready to fight each other. Sakura and Ino, in response, as if confirming Minato's thoughts, with a fighting look, synchronously nodded to the head of their village and silently headed towards the stairs leading down to the arena, where they would very soon have to fight for a place in the finals. What will happen now? Shikamaru said with some apprehension, quietly, with Chuji and Asuma in tow, getting closer to the remnants of Team Number 7, or rather, to one blonde who was closely watching what was happening in the arena, taking Sakura's place next to her. Will Ino be okay? Akimichi asked with excitement, sincerely worried about the girl who had already become his friend, glancing briefly at those with whom he spent most of his training at the academy, and whom he sincerely considered the geniuses of his generation. Sakura's self-esteem will most likely suffer in this battle, Sasuke responded, shrugging his shoulders vaguely. Besides Naruto, he got along best with this good-natured and calm guy, who, by the will of fate, found himself in their strange company, headed by a completely uncontrollable blonde, completely devoid of a sense of self-preservation and shame. I doubt, Shikamaru responded dryly, squinting his eyes unkindly at his school friend, from the drama unfolding in the arena. Actually, the guy was still angry with him for the danger Sasuke had put Naru in, having sworn to him and Chuji to protect her at all costs during the distribution of teams. 6 months ago, Naruto almost died on a mission, having, out of her own stupidity, exposed herself to their mentor's technique, while the younger Uchiha, saved by her, lay passed out 10 meters from what was happening. Apart from Team Number 7, the other participants in what happened and, in fact, the Hokage and his personal assistant, only Shika knew about this. And then only by chance, being in the right place at the right time, the guy heard a snippet of a very interesting conversation between his father and the Kage, and Shikaku, in turn, did not hide the truth from his son, considering him already old enough. That is why what happened to Naruto and the entire Team Number 7 during the exam in the Forest of Death was the very last straw for Shikamaru. Under the circumstances, they both have a completely equal chance of winning, he drawled in the same tone, watching the girls in the arena talking intensely about something. Although from the point of view of the heir of the Nara clan, it was more like the hiss of a pair of deadly poisonous snakes. I bet they're arguing again about who gets our Sasuke in the end. Meanwhile, Naruto laughed fervently, perfectly seeing the hanging tension between a couple of his oldest and closest friends, thus trying to at least slightly diffuse the atmosphere that had become heated to the limit. Whatever one may say, these two didn't really get along in the blonde's past life because of Sasuke's selfishness, his departure, and all the madness that resulted from these actions. What can we say about the academy, where the apathetic heir of the Nara clan and the aloof Uchiha simply did not find points of contact other than the Kunoichi herself? However, the reasons for such open negativity on the part of Shikamaru and the tacit agreement with all this from Sasuke now, at this time, she, frankly speaking, did not understand at all. In the arena, as if to confirm Naruto's words, the air between the rivals almost literally sparkled. "Sakura, don't be arrogant, you little crybaby." Loudly, with an extremely unkind squint, Ino shouted to the entire hall, taking a small warning step towards her childhood friend, whom she had protected from the attacks of some not very smart girls since her very first year at the Shinobi Academy. "Think about who you are running into." Already a little calmer, but with an obvious undisguised threat in her voice, the blonde spat right in Haruno's face, taking the classic attack pose. "It seems Sakura went a little overboard with provocations," cautiously Chuji said, probably for the first time seeing such a fierce look and firm determination to win in his teammate. "She's not the kind of person who would brag to offend her opponent," measuredly Hatake said, attracting the attention of 4 genin, who, from the age of 3 or 4, became those who got on his nerves almost every day. "She just doesn't want Ino to feel sorry for her and give in." The man grinned contentedly, right now clearly seeing how much his ward had grown in the time that had passed since their first survival training. Then she, using the traps prepared by Naru and Sasuke, only took the bells from the immobilized Jonin. Now the girl would definitely perform on par with her comrades, even being many times more inexperienced and weaker than them. And again Naru frowned, trying to understand why these words of Kakashi irritate her so much, because, in the girl's opinion, he said the true truth. "And Ino understands this very well," said a slightly hoarse male voice, which definitely belonged to the mentor of Team Number 10, tearing the blonde out of her strange thoughts. And in the arena, the battle of the girls finally began, in which, after the first exchange of blows, it became extremely clear to everyone that the rivals were almost equal in strength and the fight, in the end, would be based on cunning and endurance. "Asuma!" Unexpectedly for those around her, Naruto sang loudly, turning to the son of the third, wanting in this way to escape from the thoughts that were creeping into her head, considering this the best way. Because without Kurama, the girl would hardly have been able to sort through all this rubbish of feelings and incomprehensible ideas. And at least to brighten up the weight a little with a little prank, until the moment when this boring battle ends, it would be very nice. After all, Haruno and Yamanaka were now really equal in strength, and the winner of this battle, if you believe the memories of the kunoichi from a past life, for sure will not be. However, she remembered very well that the fight between Sakura and Ino, despite this, in the end was quite interesting and colorful, because both girls in the finale of the battle gave absolutely everything they were capable of, using any methods from deception to naked physical strength, wanting to outplay the enemy. Although, in fact, there was another reason why the blonde decided to get distracted. The tension that hung between Shika and Sasuke, who stood on either side of her, did not disappear. On the contrary, it gradually began to grow, while pressing and irritating Naruto. "Oh, and you have changed a lot, unlike Brovastic," she said in a slightly feigned, thoughtful tone, tapping her lower lip with her index finger, now perfectly seeing in him the one who once taught her how to handle the element of wind. Actually, in some ways the blonde really wasn't joking, because the last time she saw this man was about 5 years ago. Not counting, of course, the time when he came to the classroom, where all the genin who passed were during the distribution team as one of the mentors. Only then Naru, in the most banal way, slept through everything in the world, waiting for Kakashi to arrive. "And you remain the same little ulcer," Naruto Namikaze. Not at all embarrassed by her familiar attitude and Minato standing next to his daughter, Sarutobi responded extremely cheerfully with a wide, good-natured smile. This earned him a slightly suspicious look from the Hokage, who clearly did not know what extensive connections his little copy had in Konoha. Has she grown a little and become even more beautiful? Most likely, simply not noticing the questioning look of the blonde's father, the man added in a calmer tone. "I always said that Kakashi was lucky to have," he added with a sly look, but immediately stopped short, looking with rounded eyes somewhere behind the kunoichi's back. Exactly like Hatake, who just a minute ago was piercing Asuma with an extremely intent and very dissatisfied gaze. Even Minato, albeit belatedly, repeated the actions of the Jonins, clearly surprised by what was happening in the arena much more than his daughter's acquaintance with a pair of extremely strong Jonins. Naruto blinked in confusion and, following the example of those around her, also turned around, wanting to find out what was so unusual that had attracted everyone's attention. And it really was something to see. Sakura skillfully used explosive seals, literally not allowing Ino to move from her place and blocking all her retaliatory attacks with quiet and powerful enough explosions for this. The girl almost exquisitely controlled the amount of chakra she used for each of the seals, as if playing with her cornered prey, gradually wearing her down and gaining the upper hand in the confrontation. It was just not the skill of her teammate that surprised the blonde so much. She knew well that Sakura had a natural talent for control, which in the future would allow her to become an excellent medical ninja. The girl's attention was attracted by small white sheets with sinuous crimson-scarlet symbols, which Haruno used so delicately in front of everyone, which most definitely belonged to Naruto herself. As well as the black leather pouch with a small copper clasp, given to her by Minato for graduation, which sat mockingly right above his lighter one and a larger brother belonging to Sakura. The blonde slowly, as if not believing what exactly she was seeing in the arena, lowered her hand to her fanny pack, trying to convince herself that she was imagining black leather on Sakura's waist and sinuous symbols, clearly belonging to the Whirlpool clan, on the seal that had been torn from her hand and once again exploding right in Ino's face. But all Naruto found this is your warm thigh, covered with an unusually soft-to-the-touch tunic. How is this even? Kunoichi said to herself in surprise, forgetting out of shock that she had temporarily lost her best friend, advisor and voice of reason all rolled into one. However, if Kurama were in his rightful place, the Kunoichi, in addition to his sarcastic mocking answer diluted with wild laughter, would once again listen to a whole lecture about what kind of person she is. This isn't your pouch and seals by any chance, is it, Naru? Quite unexpectedly for the frozen girl, Kakashi asked her, looking more closely at the actions in the arena of his second ward. And the Kunoichi, perking up, finally remembered how exactly her pouch with all its contents ended up at Sakura's waist. The whole point was that just this morning she personally handed over her jewel, filled to the brim with various seals and trinkets, for literally all occasions, prepared especially for this damn exam, in order to have a good look at it, and completely covering it with a seal, tightly bandaged Sasuke's cursed mark. Here we go! The Kunoichi drawled with a groan, once again complaining about her periodic forgetfulness and absent-mindedness. However, the fact that her teammate decided to use her unexpected advantage in the form of impressive reserves of explosive seals did not bother the Kunoichi at all. Not even that. Naruto was sincerely glad that Sakura had thought of this, using all possible methods to her advantage. There was only one thing she really cared about. Haruno could have accidentally tried to use seals that were not intended for the battle of a couple of stupid genin. And especially two best friends. Yes, they are mine. The Kunoichi nodded out loud with a smile. I lent her my pouch for a while to slightly equalize the chances of a clan girl, and the first of her kind of Kunoichi cheerfully nodded at Hatake Naruto's words, mentally exhaling, because her spontaneous explanation, even without participation in the Ninetales case, turned out to be surprisingly plausible. However, out of the corner of her blue eyes she still carefully watched how the heiress of the Yamanaka clan skillfully avoided attacks, receiving a minimum of damage from her seals and Sakura's cunning attacks. Ino has her own techniques and has been trained since childhood by Inoichi himself, so, the blonde said vaguely, trying to make it look like she just wanted to equalize the chances of the two friends. However, judging by the skepticism in the views of their father and mentor, they were somehow not very convinced by this justification. This is not at all like you, voicing the thoughts of Minato and Kakashi, the Uchiha chuckled, not looking up from contemplating the colorful battle. The blonde shuddered and stared at the guy indignantly, wanting to know why she couldn't help her teammate. Although the synchronized nods of all the people around her, including Asuma, gave the girl some rather strange, extremely outrageous thoughts. Who do they think I am? Out of habit, Naru shouted to herself, outwardly still looking offendedly from one man to another. However, the girl never had time to voice her thought out loud, because this time, instead of Kurama, she was interrupted by a completely different, but equally mocking and insanely familiar voice. "Here's to you, Nero!" Turning completely away from the arena, Shikamaru said with a chuckle, as if he had read his friend's thoughts. "Even without taking into account the fact that you simply did not have time to do this before the battle between Ino and Sakura," he laughed cheerfully, folding his fingertips so that his palms formed a kind of square. "You would rather give Haruno blank sheets and ink and show him how to make a simple stamp than ready-made ones for your work," Shika continued, speaking methodically, completely ignoring the looks and even the presence of those around her, like the foxes, pushing all the garbage in the girl's head into the right places. But unlike Kurama, the mockery in his voice was more of a compliment and approval than mockery. "And even more so with your precious pouch, filled to the brim with extremely dangerous things." The guy summed up his words, looking searchingly into his blue eyes, clearly saying that he was again completely right. "It is for you." At the same moment it echoed throughout the entire hall, again gathering all the attention in the arena, which, due to the equal strength and monotony of what was happening, scattered again. Naruto, without having time to answer, for which, by the way, Ino was damn grateful, like everyone else, she turned to the arena, where the blonde with a menacing look cut off her long wheat hair in one sharp movement. "I don't need them," sharply Yamanaka snorted, barely restraining her anger, throwing her thick tail of incredibly soft and shiny blonde strands towards Sakura, who had frozen, like a statue, to herself from the surging shock. And then something happened that Naruto remembered very well from her past life. Ino, sharply folding her hands in the sheep seal, prepared to use her clan's Haiden, wanting to finally end this whole farce directly on behalf of the pink-haired girl. But Haruno, immediately freezing, quickly left the trajectory of her friend's technique, simultaneously taking out another explosive seal. And from Shikamaru and Shuji, quiet, somewhat indignant and inaudible cries of protest were heard. After all, these two, being part of the Ino Shikacho formation, knew like no one else that the Haiden of the Yamanaka clan without the shadow imitation of the Nara clan was practically useless in open one-on-one combat. Minato, who, like his daughter, was constantly watching the arena, chuckled extremely contentedly with a wide sly smile, as if noticing much more than many of those present. Although Asuma and Kakashi, who were closely watching the battle, also somehow frowned suspiciously, definitely sensing some kind of global catch in what was happening. In the arena, the girls finally took decisive action. "No need!" Still, unable to bear it, Shikamaru shouted to the whole hall, trying to reason with his teammate, who decided to use hidden, literally intended for espionage and sneak attacks, in a single battle. "Sakura almost lost," Naruto said almost at the same time, just a couple of seconds before the pink-haired girl took off, and the blonde professionally pretended to use Shintenshin no Jutsu. Actually, the kunoichi, despite certain events from her past life, came to this conclusion for a fairly simple reason. She saw perfectly well that this time the pink-haired girl had spent too much chakra on her seals and was unlikely to be able to somehow resist Ino's technique. Everything happened completely unnoticed, and in a matter of moments the winner of the battle was actually determined, without any fighting or bloodshed. Ino, as in the girl's previous life, outplayed her opponent, turned out to be more cunning and prudent, and Haruno fell into her unusual trap. The blonde's hair, like shackles of shadow imitation shiki, played the role of chains of chakra and long strands randomly scattered between rivals. "Inoichi has raised a daughter worthy of his clan," Minato said contentedly, while everyone else was trying to understand what exactly happened, because only Hade heard what the girls said in the arena. "It was brilliant!" His small copy echoed the man admiringly, watching Yamanaka use the transfer of consciousness technique to Haruno. "Now, unlike last time, I fully understand how this trick works and what exactly it cost Ino to bring such a daring and cunning plan to life." "But you're not entirely right, Dad," the girl immediately grinned, at the last moment noticing one small detail, as then, shuffling almost all the variables, completely destroying the seemingly obvious conclusions and turning the course of the battle upside down. "This pink-haired girl won't harm herself either?" Leaning further forward, Shikamaru muttered in horror, noticing the reason why Naruto changed her mind so abruptly. And then a loud, uncontrollable explosion, like everything before, was heard in the arena, instantly covering the entire space with dust, concrete chips, and acrid smoke, causing the blonde to unconsciously tense up as she stared into the gray void. After all, whatever one may say, judging by the scale of the destruction, exactly what she feared most happened. Kakashi, Asuma, and Minato immediately took off, disappearing into the thick smog, while the others fell silent and watched with curiosity from the balcony, wondering who had won. What was it? The heir of the Nara clan asked quietly and somehow chokily, without turning his head, but clearly addressing the one who was partly to blame for these destructions. Explosive seal, enhanced with a pair of symbols and special ink, Naruto said in one breath, thanking God that Sakura did not have enough chakra to use the full potential of the seal, while simultaneously monitoring the flows of chakra still hidden behind the clouds of smoke of people. Apparently both girls were alive, but were unconscious, and most likely the condition of both left much to be desired. Hayate, following the Hokage and the mentors of his rivals, disappeared into the gradually settling dust, wanting to find out who won. Both participants cannot continue the fight. The examiner's voice rang out a couple of minutes later, when the smog finally cleared, revealing to the eyes of those present the silhouettes of 4 serious men, 2 of whom were holding those same opponents in their arms. Double knockout. There is no winner in the 4th qualifying round, he drawled, coming forward, causing with his words a new round of questions and surprise. Naruto exhaled sharply. Her father, although he looked collected and serious, was quite relaxed, which meant the girls did not receive any critical injuries. At worst, they escaped with a slight concussion and several severe bruises and burns. They weren't seriously injured, but I would like Sakura and Ino to be examined by medical ninjas, the Hokage dryly said to the people in white robes who appeared in the arena, gesturing to the jounin to transfer their charges to the care of doctors. Later, when the girls come to their senses and rest, we will cast lots, which will show which of them will be in the final stage of the Chunin exam. The blonde announced loudly when the dust finally settled, revealing to everyone exactly what the pink-haired girl's last seal had done to the concrete floor and walls of the arena. A huge deep pothole, covered with a thick layer of soot, concrete crumbles, and small splashes of blood, clearly indicated that the kunoichi was incredibly lucky not only to survive, but also to escape with minor injuries. Now let's choose the next pair of opponents. As soon as the men returned to the balcony, the girls were taken away by the doctors, and the area around was a little cleared and brought back to a relatively previous state. Clearing his throat, Hayate said loudly, gesturing at the signs that flashed again. Temari and Tenten, drawled the examiner, gesturing for the new pair of genin to take their places. But Naruto didn't see this anymore. What kind of seal was this? Pulling Naruto away from everyone as quietly as possible, Minato asked quietly, but damn sternly, making sure that it was not his daughter who would enter the arena next. It was Mom's idea. She was experimenting with the classic seals of her clan. Lowering her head so that her golden hair completely hid her face, the blonde responded extremely sadly. She didn't see any point in telling a lie to her father this time, because she too keenly felt partly her guilt in what had happened. And the chief liar in their tandem with the 9 tails was now temporarily absent from his rightful place, and the kunoichi herself, as it recently turned out, was lying, probably worse than a 3-year-old child. I decided that an enhanced explosive seal would be useful for our team during this stage, so I made a couple. The blonde perfectly felt how a treacherous hysteria was beginning to rise in her throat, of which there was not even a hint when she contemplated the explosion and its consequences. Only now finally realizing that in the worst-case scenario, Ino and Sakura could have died. After all, in fact, what saved the girls was far from a miracle, but severe exhaustion and the pink-haired woman's complete loss of control over her body. I just forgot. I forgot that I gave her my damn pouch when I bandaged Sasuke. She drawled a little louder, with anguish, smearing the tears that rolled down her face, mentally cursing Orochimaru, who hid Kurama, who kept an eye on such little things, herself for inattention and absent-mindedness, and even Sakura for her unauthorized use of other people's unfamiliar seals. I just wanted the best, Dad. I wanted to protect my team with all my might. Hysterically, she said, looking directly into the face of her sad father, looking for support. It's okay, Naru, I understand perfectly what you mean. Gently hugging his daughter, the man quietly responded, now clearly seeing what a child she really is. But promise me that next time you will be more attentive to such things. He drawled with a bit of sternness, looking at the girl's red and funny but determined face, carefully wiping away tears from it with his thumbs. Otherwise, something irreparable could easily happen, the blonde said with sadness, remembering exactly how even the most minor mistakes of the Kage end. The 5th battle is over. Hyde's voice suddenly sounded, causing the Hokage and his daughter to blink in surprise, instantly forgetting about any lyrics, because no more than 5 minutes had passed since the start of the fight. Winner Temari! The examiner said just as loudly, drowning out the quiet, surprised whispers coming from absolutely all sides. So fast? At the same time, turning to the voice of the special Jonin, father and daughter said in disbelief in unison, partly regretting that they missed this fight. And then something strange happened. A loud ringing noise was heard from the arena, as if someone had piled up a huge amount of weapons, and immediately one of the genin from Guy's team rushed out of his place. Minato, sensing possible problems, instantly released Naruto from her hands and disappeared from her field of vision, appearing in his original place, next to Kakashi. Rock Lee, leave the arena immediately! Next, the Hokage said loudly and commandingly at the exact moment when Naru, following his example, found herself next to her father, using the old seal on his hand. One glance was enough for the girl to remember the reason for what happened, which is why she stared indignantly at the stern Minato, because, in her opinion, it was Gaara's sister who was wrong in this situation. If you attack this girl, Lee, you will be immediately disqualified. Extremely, he drawled coldly, completely throwing the blonde and all the genin from the Leaf Village into shock, who sincerely believed that Temari had crossed the border. Lee, obey Hokage-sama's orders immediately! Strictly shouted his mentor in the same tone, as if duplicating the voice of his immediate superiors. But Guy-sensei! Standing with Tenten in his arms, the guy said in confusion, a minute ago ready to attack the kunoichi who had insulted them. But having stumbled upon a pair of icy eyes of Minato, looking sternly at him from the height of the balcony, the guy shuddered and, without letting go of his teammate, obeying the head of his village, quickly left the arena. Temari, finish it already! Monotonously called Gaara's sister with a dissatisfied face and, looking at Naruto standing next to his father, added, on behalf of the Kazekage children, I apologize for my older sister's intemperance. So we can continue. After a short nod, the Hokage said, clearing his throat, while the signs on the wall were already flashing, choosing a new pair of opponents. Shikamaru Nara vs. Kintsuchi. Sheik, show her. Deciding that she would then deal with her father's incomprehensible act, Naruto shouted with a wide smile, hugging the gloomy guy, who clearly did not share her enthusiasm. Because this girl was from the same team as Akado Iro Sasuke's opponent and member of the Sound Team, which attacked them in the Forest of Death a few days ago. Avenge her for Ino! Already she drawled a little more quietly, looking into her friend's tired face, fleetingly recalling what happened at the second stage. Win! Finally said the kunoichi, and for the first time in their long friendship kissed the guy on the cheek, believing that by singling out only Sasuke among other friends of the opposite sex and further, there would be even more problems with Kakashi, Minato, and Kurama. That's really stressful, Shika chuckled in an even more tired voice, seemingly not at all surprised by the kunoichi's impetuous act. It's just that the pinkish cheeks, tips of the ears, and slightly dilated pupils betrayed his confusion. I don't promise anything, Naru, he said gloomily, briefly nodding to Chuji, and got out of her arms, steadfastly ignoring the boring glances of those around him. What's remarkable is that even Sasuke didn't take his eyes off him, as if trying to make an extra hole in the guy. And yes, if it was an apology, it is accepted. Shika smiled fleetingly, clearly interpreting the blonde's actions in his own way, and headed towards the stairs, completely not caring about his pathetically jumping rival, who was impatiently waiting for him next to the examiner. "Let's start," Hade said loudly as the heir of the Nara clan reached his seat, yawning lazily. Shikamaru's fight was interesting, as always. A genius of strategy, like his father, he quickly figured out the trick of the kin technique, which, by the way, was extremely simple. Saban, with a small bell at one end and a thin thread, was ideal for confusing an opponent and slowly wearing them down. After all, recognizing an old trick in her technique, the shinobi did not immediately understand that in addition to the bell, the thinnest thread, stretched to the limit, was attached to the needle, and at the slightest movement of the hand, it sent the sanban flying back. And considering that those who used such techniques were often, like Haku, masters capable of hitting vital organs even at a great distance, the girl's attack became even more dangerous. However, Shika would not be Shika if he fell into such a trap without turning the enemy's advantage in his favor. Keen didn't even pay attention to the thin, barely noticeable shadow of her thread attached to the needle, which simply shouldn't have been there. And it was precisely this miscalculation of the kunoichi that allowed Shikamaru to use Kageme no Jutsu, captivating his opponent, who naively decided that she had almost won. Having caught the enemy in his trap, the heir of the Nara clan chose, probably, the strangest way to knock her out. He forced her to throw shuriken at herself, mirroring her own actions, just as she dodged, leaning straight back. But Shikamaru simply stood on the bridge, and Kin slammed her head into the concrete wall of the arena, which was right behind her. "Shika, you're great!" exploded onto Naruto's podium, bouncing in place. "Class!" At the same time, Chuji shouted to the quiet chuckle of the Uchiha, who limited himself to applause. "Winner Shikamaru Nara!" Hate announced after checking the condition of the Sound Village Genin. "Your father can be proud of his heir," Minato gently praised the guy when he climbed back to the balcony, where he was immediately surrounded by friends, vying with each other to congratulate him on making it to the finals. Although Shikamaru's own sour expression immediately made it clear how glad he was about his victory. So, the next fight, quite unexpectedly, Hyde's words were heard throughout the arena, causing Nara and Chuji, still building near Shiki, to flinch. Namikaze Naruto vs Inuzuka Kiba. Chapter 45 First Victims? Namikaze Naruto vs Inuzuka Kiba. Hyde's loud words scattered throughout the arena, momentarily causing the joyful blonde to freeze in place in surprise. However, after just 1/100th of a second, the girl looked at her instantly silent friends with an extremely belligerent look and, turning away from their confused faces, silently headed towards the stairs leading to the first tier. But her complete confidence in her quick and clean victory was just enough to get to the center of the arena, where a relaxed Kiba was already waiting for her with Akamaru on top of his head. With a predatory smile, he looked extremely eloquently at his miniature opponent, as if promising her what she herself had previously prepared for him. However, the blonde now had no time for these staring contests. All its seriousness and determination gradually slipped from her sweet face. Notes of confusion, and even a touch of some fear appeared. The kunoichi, not paying attention to anyone, exhaled convulsively several times, trying to collect her thoughts, and looked uncertainly, first at the balcony, and then at her stern examiner, who seemed not to even notice the complete confusion of one of the participants in the battle. One moment, not knowing what else to do, Naruto babbled with a tight apologetic smile, interrupting the man who was already ready to announce the start of the next battle. Then, without waiting for Hyde's answer or Kiba's indignation, she turned around sharply and, under the incomprehensible glances and whispers of everyone present, rushed headlong back to the balcony, as if her future life depended on it. "Dad!" The girl hissed excitedly, out of earshot, as soon as she was next to her parent. "My pouch! Sakura still has it, and the doctors took her away." Grabbing the lapels of his cape with a death grip, she drawled a little louder in an excited tone, looking for support in him, noticing from the corner of her eyes extremely dissatisfied glances directed at her from all sides. "And?" Minato responded with considerable surprise, completely not understanding what exactly his daughter wanted from him. Whatever one may say, he certainly could not cancel, delay or somehow help her win this fight, since such actions on the part of the Hokage would be a direct violation of the rules of the qualifying stage. As, in fact, these actions of any of the persons present here. No, of course, the situation in which his Nera found herself was far from unpleasant, because fighting with bare hands against an armed genin is in any case not an easy task. But, considering all the techniques and tricks that this little genius has in her arsenal, coupled with the experience of sparring with very strong shinobi, she definitely shouldn't have any problems with winning. How do you expect me to fight without its contents? Slightly the blonde asked hysterically, looking with sincere resentment at her father, who, in her opinion, out of spite, decided to play at the most inopportune moment. All my, you yourself gave Sakura your pouch. And you yourself forgot about it after her battle. With a sternness in her voice that was unusual for the blonde, her continuous stream of thoughts was interrupted by Kakashi standing next to them, who, like Minato, sincerely did not understand the capricious behavior that was absolutely out of character for her ward. And given your skills, my dear, and some talents, this way your and Inuzuka's chances of winning will only be equalized, as you yourself wanted before. He chuckled, persistently ignoring the strange, somehow haunted and at the same time offended look of the blue oceans that had long captivated him. After his categorical words, the blonde finally began to understand the reason for the misunderstanding that had developed around her and the complete ignorance of the obvious problem. After all, in fact, none of those present knew that Orochimaru had blocked all the flows of chakra moving along her Kirakuki. The same pitiful remnants that were still preserved in the Kunoichi's body after the second stage of the exam and the labor-intensive production of restraining seals for Sasuke with his cursed seal, only enough for a couple of shadow clones, one summon of Pakken and, at best, 2 or 3 uses of the Thunder God technique. Naruto wasn't even worth talking about the Rasengan in this situation. Kakashi is completely right, Neru, Minato nodded briefly, confirming the words of his daughter's student and mentor, cutting off with his actions all possible subsequent indignations of the blonde, which were stuck in her throat like a huge dry lump after the final realization of the problem and the injustice of what was happening to the fullest. Come on, they're waiting for you, the man said sternly and, sharply turning back to the arena, added with an apologetic look, turning to Hate, who was dissatisfied with the whole situation, I apologize for this slight delay. Naruto, realizing that no one was going to understand, support and help her, chuckled angrily, imagining with some sadistic pleasure how she was telling her father and Kakashi about her problem after this damn fight, which she would definitely win, even in such a deplorable state. At the same time with these thoughts, the girl, with a thoughtful look, slowly walked back to the stairs, as she went, trying to calculate how exactly she should fight now in order to wipe everyone's noses. Because, no matter how you look at the current circumstances, she probably had even less chance of winning now than in her previous life. Actually, the only thing that could really help her in this situation was a clear, thoroughly thought-out plan that takes into account absolutely all variables, including the actions of her opponent and his pet. But the one who was responsible for all the planning was now completely inaccessible, and the only thing that came to Naruto's mind was just a ridiculous option, which, frankly, was even worse than what she did last time. Kurama! The girl drawled to herself, almost crying, approaching her previous place. Sorry, I lost my lucky hair tie. A little she said embarrassedly, stopping opposite Kiba, while feeling a lot of dissatisfied looks on her skin, and throwing her soft blonde hair, shimmering in the bright light of the hall, over one shoulder, she smiled sweetly at Hate, irritated by all this action. Damn you thrice, you damn snake Sanin! The Kunoichi mentally snorted angrily, briefly glancing at the place from which the chakra of this elderly Orochimaru was felt. We can continue, the Kunoichi added cheerfully out loud, under the slightly skeptical gaze of the examiner, who eloquently glanced at her still flowing hair. Well then, let's start the 7th round. Clearing his throat, Hate said hoarsely, nodding briefly at the girl's words, and jumped back to the very edge of the arena so as not to interfere with the next battle of the genin. You're lucky, consider yourself to have already won, right, Akamaru? The guy immediately laughed loudly, to the agreement of his faithful pet, sincerely believing that the ephemeral Haim in front of him, who cares more about her hair than the exam itself, is not capable of anything without a couple of her eternal guards and her influential Kage dad. Maybe you'll just give in to me, huh, Naruto? Kiba said in a mocking, almost mocking tone, looking up at the miniature blonde standing in front of him, who clearly didn't know where or how to start their battle. I somehow don't want to spoil such a pretty face with blood and bruises, the guy somehow said too arrogantly, taking a small step towards the kunoichi, and from all sides there was a literally deafening whistle and roar of the crowd of genin, fully supporting his words, anticipating an easy victory for Inuzuka. The kunoichi slowly but surely began to boil, mentally trying with all her might to pull herself together, because if she lost control, then, at best, she would only be able to get her knee on his annoying, impudent face a couple of times. To your greatest regret, I have to refuse such a generous offer, Kiba. With the sweetest, poisonously sugary smile and the languid, half-closed gaze of clear blue eyes, the blonde sweetly drawled a few seconds later, having finally pulled herself together. But despite the soft pink blush that set off the bright crimson fangs that immediately colored the cheeks and tips of the ears of the guy in front of her, he did not flinch, probably for the first time since the end of their studies at the academy, without falling for the spell of the Haim of their village. Instead, Inuzuka, grinning his mouth even wider in victory, proudly placed his hands on his hips, demonstrating his complete readiness to fight. "It won't work, little Naru," he said sarcastically, deliberately using the diminutive form of her name, which was used exclusively by people close to her. "Just not today." "What a bastard!" The blonde snorted angrily, previously sincerely hoping that this trick with her ears could really work, in 1/100th of a second, from a cute fragile girl becoming a frightening kunoichi with a piercing icy gaze. "So, let's do it the hard way, Inuzuka," she drawled with considerable malice in a menacing, soul-chilling tone, which at this time only a select few received from Naruto. Although, to be honest, the guy ended up on this list completely by accident, simply falling under the blonde's arm at the wrong time and in the wrong place. So, at the same time, the girl threw her hair back with a smooth but clear movement, preparing for the first stage of her grand plan. Kiba, standing in front of her, clearly shuddered when he saw such a dramatic change in the behavior of the always kind and positive girl, with whom probably a good half of their stream was secretly in love. But none of these people, essentially, knew absolutely nothing about Minato Namake's daughter, whom he looked after like the apple of his eye. Actually, none of the outsiders knew anything even significant about Naru, considering her a stupid and spoiled daughter Hokage, who daily ruins the lives of the civilian population of the Hidden Leaf Village with impunity. Now a completely different personality appeared before the guy. A calm, confident and damn scary kunoichi, from whom you could almost physically feel the danger. "Well, with God," the girl drawled to herself, sharply biting her thumb, and automatically making the necessary seals, lowered her open palm onto the white concrete floor. Kiba, probably like everyone else, looked in surprise at the thick clouds of white smoke that filled the entire space in front of him, expecting to see who his opponent had summoned, clearly not quite believing the veracity of what was happening. After all, no matter how you look at it, just recently this blonde couldn't create even the simplest ghostly clone, failing exams and practice over and over again. Now she can easily use Kuchio's no jutsu. However, the fact that this devil used the summoning technique surprised not only him. Even Shika, with whom Naruto had almost always shared everything since childhood, asking for advice and boasting about her successes, silently watched what was happening in the arena, just like everyone else, being in a kind of prostration. However, instead of any summoned animal, bulky weapon, or, at worst, her lost pouch, a spectacular, curvaceous female shadow appeared in the thick clouds of slowly dissipating smoke, which was slightly taller than Naruto herself. She slowly, almost imperceptibly swam forward, slowly approaching Inuzuka, gradually dividing into 3 absolutely identical silhouettes. "Let's play, Kibie," playfully drawled the soft voice of the blonde from somewhere out of the dense smoke, distracting the guy, while 2 of the shadows, having finally separated from the first, began to disperse, step by step surrounding their victim, tensely frozen in place. When the silhouette that was walking towards him finally appeared through a white veil of smoke, the whole hall synchronously gasped and plunged into dead silence. For in the place of a very young kunoichi, a sultry beauty flaunted, as if she had stepped out of the pages of the most revealing men's magazines, attracting absolutely all the attention of others. With her smooth but clear movements and sharp gaze, she looked more like a wild cat, just as flexible, graceful, and, despite the minimum of clothing, unapproachable. A half-naked girl with a sly smile who appeared in the arena continued to leisurely approach the instantly blushing guy, who seemed to have completely forgotten about the other two shadows, still hiding somewhere in the translucent smoke. And the only thing that broke the general static silence, a quiet, menacing roar coming straight from the top of Kiba's head, threatening at any moment to completely ruin the girl's entire plan, on which Naruto had invested all her remaining chakra. "We act according to the original plan," the girl whispered quietly, masking her words with a playful laugh, as if by chance, while walking, arching in the most seductive pose that she had seen while traveling with Jiraiya in her past life. And judging by the fact that the poor guy opposite her blushed even more, merging the color with the crimson-scarlet fangs on his cheeks, she did it simply gorgeous. Minato watched with some surprise the actions of his only daughter, sincerely not understanding why she did not act the same way as during their periodic sparring. After all, Naruto usually fought completely differently. She fought literally to the limit of her capabilities, constantly attacking, using all possibilities, and trying not just to win, but to outplay her opponent. Due to her lively, explosive character and innate talent, his daughter often acted somewhere on an intuitive level, constructing spontaneous, cunning plans of attacks right in the midst of battle, greatly surprising her opponents. Actually, this was not surprising, since her mother, Kushina Uzumaki, in her youth she was just as uncontrollable, terribly cunning and strong. The heiress of scarlet-haired demons, known for their active disposition and fiery character. His beloved simply could not always reason sensibly during sparring and real battles, emerging victorious in most cases solely because of her excellent skills and keen natural instincts. And the fact that the daughter of this explosive woman, who inherited the hot blood of the Whirlpool clan, first tried to seduce her opponent in the most brazen way was, to put it mildly, shocking. Still, this, although it did not contradict the conditions of the qualifying round, was absolutely not in the spirit of Naruto herself. However, sometimes his Naru actually behaved a little differently, acting the way Minato himself preferred, thoroughly calculating all possible options in advance, and choosing the best one, using it to the fullest. Only now his daughter appeared completely different. It seemed that she was either using her last chance in a panic, or was so angry that she was simply unable to fully control her actions. Minato strangely imagined that there, in the arena, there was now a complete stranger to him, an inexperienced, weak, but extremely determined orphan, reminiscent of his lively and talented daughter only in appearance. It was some very strange and completely irrational feeling, gradually driving the man crazy. After all these strange thoughts were complete nonsense. Something is wrong with Naru. Snatching the Hokage out of his thoughts, Shikamaru said slightly tensely, constantly looking at the arena, where his first real girlfriend, after a trifling failure, began, in the literal sense of the word, change before our eyes. A cold look of frozen eyes, a gloomy hard face, and a tense body like a stretched string. All this was definitely a bad sign, especially when performed by this particular girl. She acts like she's really afraid of Kiba. With considerable surprise at his own wild guess, Shikaka's son said, on the verge of hearing, knowing exactly what he was talking about now. It was his and Naruto's little secret, but it had happened once before when they were both no more than 8. And it all ended relatively well only because the heir of the Nara clan stopped the daughter of the 4th Hokage in time. Then the blonde, while hanging out with Shika, got into a fight with some overly arrogant, boorish owner of a store that interested her with a variety of trinkets for the home, souvenirs, carved children's toys, and all sorts of similar, completely useless rubbish in life. Initially, the girl simply wanted to buy herself a porcelain fox mask, deliriously joyfully telling her friend that Kakashi had exactly the same one when he still served as an ANBU commander and was her first nanny. Shikamaru, lazily nodding at her words, considered it best to remain silent, because he was not eager to explain to his friend that these two masks had as much in common as a city wall and an old rotten fence. And he absolutely did not want to spoil such a good mood for the girl. However, as soon as the radiantly smiling blonde came a little closer to a large stand with various kinds of masks, the owner of this shop, with a wild, hateful look, literally pounced on her, sharply pushing the child away from the counter. Naruto, while the guy was in a certain state of shock, could not stay on his feet and fell to his knees with a cry. But instead of apologizing or explaining their strange actions, the Hokage's daughter was completely justified by her indignation, calling her a small monster of Konoha, unworthy of life. It was then that Shikamaru, finally dying out, stood up for his friend, wanting to put this ignoramus in his place. Abruptly cutting off the speaker, he tried to explain as clearly as possible to the owner of the shop why he shouldn't say such things to Hima Leaf. However, all his eloquent speeches did not have the desired effect in the cellar, to the consonant hooting of a whole crowd of onlookers, who had already gathered a whole crowd of onlookers, threw that same fox mask towards the girl sitting on the ground with an incomprehensible look, snorting something about a mask suitable for a monster. At that same moment, something happened that he later swore to Naruto to keep in the strictest confidence for the rest of his life. The blonde, hearing this, seemed genuinely frightened by his strange words, shuddered, turned pale and shrank all over, as if this was not the first time she had suffered something like this from strangers. Which, for obvious reasons, whose name was Minato Namikaze, simply could not happen. And then the girl somehow changed dramatically, becoming like a wild, cornered animal, angry, a row of even white teeth, a sharp cold gaze that promises death to her offender, an attack stance and a sharp kunai flashing in her hand. She was seriously planning to attack some vile person who had thoughtlessly insulted the Hokage's beloved daughter in front of an impressive crowd. But in Naruto's dimmed eyes one could clearly see boundless sadness, fear and hopelessness, which scared the hell out of Shikamaru standing next to her. Therefore, with a heavy sigh, he stepped forward, confidently pushing his girlfriend behind his back, and used the Haiden of his clan, wanting to put an end to this disgrace. What the hell? My girl can't be afraid of this guy. Minato interrupted his thoughts with obvious indignation, sincerely not understanding how this smart boy could carry such nonsense. The man continued to speak, not allowing the son of his personal assistant to open his mouth, but he himself, abruptly breaking off his speech, stared at the arena, where Naruto most definitely used Kuchio's no jutsu. Does she know the summoning technique? The man said in surprise, as did Shikamaru, carefully peering into the arena, which was instantly covered in a dense cloud of white smoke, trying to understand who or what his daughter had called. I personally taught her this, Minato-sama, Kakashi responded with some pride in his voice, mentally applauding his ward's idea. Because his favorite Pakin, whom Naru could summon even with her eyes closed, could easily be pitted against not only Akamaru, but even an adult Niken. And thanks to this, the girl herself could completely calmly concentrate on the battle with his owner. However, after about half a minute, instead of a cute little dog, out of the clouds of smoke came Naruto, who had matured by 5 years, wearing something more reminiscent of skimpy underwear. Actually, this was the last thing that Hatake saw, who did not even have time to figure out what exactly was happening. Because at the same moment the Hokage's fingers closed in a death grip on his neck, threatening to end the life of his last student without any trial or investigation. Hearing a muffled bark from somewhere in the depths of the smoke, as Naruto had planned, Akamaru fell silent for a moment, bristled and briskly jumping from the top of his master's head, rushed with a warlike look towards the almost imperceptible sound, leaving his master, alone, with his enemy. Although, in fairness, it should be noted that the stupid puppy, most likely, at the level of instincts, wanted to protect his partner from the threat of another, more adult Niken. Kiba, after his pet's completely unexpected escape, glanced after him a little nervously, came to life, finally starting to think soberly. The guy, looking around, exhaled warily and, leaning forward a little, prepared for his fastest and most effective single attack. To the piercing Fang of the Inuzuka clan. Internally trying to understand how this sweet, slightly absurd and mischievous, but still damn attractive girl suddenly became this Naruto, with whom he often played pranks during the academy, in a matter of minutes became like his complete opposite. It just didn't fit in the guy's head. But he knew one thing for sure: under no circumstances could he delay his attack further. For some reason the kunoichi standing in front of him now inspired no less fear than her father and sensei combined. It seemed that before him was a man who had survived a fierce war, full of losses and tears, and who had won at an unacceptably high cost. A completely irrational feeling, given the fact of exactly how the blonde standing in front of him looked at the moment. Naruto, as if mocking her opponent in the most impudent way, did not pay even the slightest attention to his actions. She, stopping at a distance of about 10 meters from Inuzuka, silently folded her palms into the Torai seal and playfully glanced towards her opponent, who involuntarily flinched because of this action of the kunoichi. From the outside, all this most likely looked like some kind of harsh psychological pressure, but in fact, Naru at that moment was much more afraid of her opponent, probably relying on pure perseverance. "Well, Kiba, let's start our little game," the girl drawled in a slightly dreamy tone right from behind the guy, and in front of him her silent copy quickly folded her hands into a sheep seal and put her leg forward. Inuzuka turned sharply, ignoring the actions of what he thought was a clone, clearly not expecting such tricks on the part of the incompetent Naruto, immediately meeting his gaze with an exact copy of the previous girl, who with a sly smile mirrored the actions of her copy. "I didn't guess, one more try." The girl laughed fervently again from somewhere to his left, as if she were really playing tag with him. But Kiba himself did not consider this damn mocking game funny at all, gradually starting to lose his temper. Therefore, turning sharply once again to the melodic voice and again meeting his gaze with the same static copy of the blonde from his stream, which, frankly, the guy wanted to strangle with his own hands, despite all her beauty and eminent daddy, he literally growled. The clone, giggling sweetly, as if mocking his actions, again repeated the actions of his predecessors. "Damn you, Naruto Namikaze!" Still, unable to bear it, Inuzuka shouted to the whole hall, piercing his eyes with the seductive woman, who essentially licked her plump pink lips. "There were only 3, so one of you must be real anyway." He grinned predatorily, quickly moving back into an attack stance, his eyes continuously following each of his static targets. But all 3 Naru clones instantly disappeared, as soon as the guy released a little more chakra for the final preparation of the piercing Fang, thereby introducing him into a real stupor. "Akamaru, come to me!" Taking a few steps away from the new puffs of smoke that appeared after the disappearance of the blonde's clones, Kiba shouted, hoping at least together with him to smell this devil. Only now realizing that the entire arena was saturated with the smell of the girl's chakra, which unknowingly confused him from the very beginning. "Akamaru is a little busy playing with my little friend named Pakin right now." Again Naruto laughed right from behind him, forcing Kiba to retreat back to the very center of the arena, where the smoke had almost cleared, but had not yet completely disappeared. And then the strangest thing happened that happened to the heir of the Inuzuka clan during this abnormal battle from Heim of the Hidden Leaf Village, which, as he thought at the very beginning, was won even before the battle began. Something like a bright yellow flash rushed through the white smoke, cutting it like soft butter with a knife, and with a strong blow to the solar plexus, knocked him off his feet, sending him flying several meters back. And then, without even allowing him to catch his breath and get up, the same flash, as it seemed to him, slammed his knee right into his nose, leaving behind only a yellow trail, so similar to lightning among grayish thunderclouds. "Is it really God's technique?" Inuzuka muttered, covering his nose, from which crimson blood flowed like a faucet, and then, after another precise blow to the back of the head, everything around him went dark for the guy. Naruto, standing on trembling legs, looked at Kiba, who was covering his nose, finally realizing exactly what technique she was using, while simultaneously gathering strength for the last push, which would deplete her chakra reserves to almost 0. Actually, Naru was well aware that if Inuzuka did not pass out even after her third blow, then she would absolutely lose in this battle, while, ironically, without receiving a single blow from the enemy. After all, no matter how you look at it, after the next use of the Thunder God's technique, the blonde's chakra will remain solely for maintaining her carcass for another 5 minutes in relative consciousness. And this is in the best case scenario, because in the worst case, Naruto will simply faint and he and Kiba will have the same draw as Sakura and Ino. And the Kunoichi didn't want to leave everything to chance, probably even more than she wanted to lose, because in her past life, as in this one, she clearly wasn't always lucky with luck. Smiling at the surprised look of Kiba looking around, Naruto exhaled all the air from her lungs and, concentrating on one of the 3 seals left by her clones right in the arena, took off from her place just at the moment when the guy was looking in the opposite direction. Her blow landed right on the back of the head, fortunately for the girl, instantly knocking out Inuzuka. But the blonde herself, having landed a couple of meters from the guy, staggered, momentarily losing touch with the real world, while feeling terrible fatigue and dizziness. Namikaze Naruto defeated. Hate said loudly, suddenly appearing behind the girl, causing a ringing in her ears. The blonde snorted quietly and, carefully shaking her head, looked at the balcony, dreaming that Kakashi or Minato would take her away from the arena as soon as possible. However, what she saw there made the girl chuckle nervously, believing that she was lying passed out next to Kiba. Unfortunately, she couldn't explain in any other way that her father was strangling his student in front of a whole crowd, so, "Dad, congratulate your daughter on her victory!" She screamed loudly, deafening herself for a split second, and began to fall, slowly realizing that before that, it turns out, she had been fully conscious. The last thing the girl felt a familiar aroma, strong hands pressing her tightly to her chest, and literally a flurry of applause. Chapter 46 Young Geniuses. The muffled hum of talking voices, quiet arguments, the sounds of a fierce battle, and the strong smell of blood breaking through the veil of sleep made Naruto fuss indignantly in the desire to run away from them back to the kingdom of Morphus floating away from her. Yawning widely, the girl tried to turn over on her side, away from the source of this annoying noise. But even here a crushing failure awaited her, for something tightly squeezed the shoulders of the sleeping beauty, completely constraining all her movements. Actually, it was this, coupled with the absolute silence in the Kunoichi's skull, where her personal demon usually raged 24 hours and 7 days a week, that forced the sleepy brain of the exhausted Nara to helpfully throw up the first memory from her new life, drawing a rather simple analogy with him. No. Shuddering, the blonde jumped up sharply, frantically grabbing the first surface that came to her hand. "Why? Why is this happening to me again?" cried out in fear, although because of her dry throat, her voice sounded more like some kind of strangled wheeze. "Kunoichi, I didn't do anything," she added strangledly, and continuing to desperately struggle, finally opened her blue eyes, reddened due to broken capillaries. "Naru, sunshine, calm down," an incredibly soft and soothing voice, which the blonde knew very well, came from right above her ear. At the same time, the speaker masterfully stopped all her spontaneous attempts to slip out of his hands, tightly but carefully hugging some unusually frightened girl to himself. "Your fight with Kiba is over and you won, Naru, so calm down," the man whispered even more quietly, scorching her earlobe with his hot breath, feeling how the student in his arms gradually relaxed, slowly coming to her senses. Naruto blinked slightly dazedly, finally realizing that she was still on the balcony in the hall where the intermediate stage was taking place. Directly in front of the girl, with their backs to her, stood Minato, her teammates, and Asuma and Kurenai with their teams, carefully watching the battle unfolding in the arena, periodically commenting on what was happening. The girl exhaled sharply, collecting her thoughts and relaxing, because she, in the end, won. And yet she did not return to the beginning of all this hell, into which her life was slowly but surely turning. However, after a couple of moments, Naru tensed her whole body again, and then suddenly turned red like a ripe tomato, desperately wanting to fall back into oblivion. Because, as it turned out upon closer examination, at the moment her carcass was not just lying in a semi-conscious state behind everyone on the balcony, as was the case with Sakura and Ino in her past life, but was proudly sitting on the lap of Kakashi, who was carefully pressing her to himself, who quietly whispered some soothing nonsense in her ear all this time. But the worst thing was that with her sleepy cries and spontaneous actions, the girl again attracted to them a bunch of unnecessary things, completely unnecessary for the blonde at this time. Too intimate for her personally, moment of attention. "How are you?" A louder question came to her from Hataki, who decided that she had finally come to her senses. "Naru, my dear, I was so scared when you passed out." Immediately being nearby, her father announced, literally snatching her daughter from the tenacious hands of her mentor and pressing her confused and indecently embarrassed body to his chest. "Everything is fine, but if you don't let me go now, this may change." The girl croaked menacingly into his vest, despite her tone, terribly grateful to her father, who saved her from yet another sea of embarrassment and shame. "But what exactly happened to you?" Pulling back slightly, Minato said questioningly, accompanied by a student who agreed with his question and managed to get to his feet. However, the genin standing a little behind also froze like curious gophers, waiting to find out the answer to this question. "Your chakra, given its entire reserve, simply could not run out," her father continued to speak, moving away from his small copy at a distance of one step. In response, Naruto only snorted and, folding her arms over her chest, glared at a couple of adult men, as if they had spoiled kittens. "We'll discuss this issue later, Dad." The kunoichi snapped, and, looking around at the people surrounding her, chuckled. "Apparently, members of the Hyuga clan are fighting, Haim and her future protector and support." The girl drawled thoughtfully, trying to remember the details of their battle, which seemed to be supposed to begin after her own. By the way, the fact that she, having used her chakra to zero, recovered so quickly, returning to a relatively good state, was extremely strange, but this could have been dealt with later. Now the blonde was worried about how the remaining 3 fights would go. "Niji and Hinata," the girl repeated quietly, continuing to delve into memories, slowly mixing into some kind of mess with new ones. But the only thing that came to the girl's mind was the next fight, Gaara and Rock Lee, completely overshadowing what happened with the couple from the Hyuga clan. "I will not go back on my words, this is my ninja way," Hinata said loudly, the first time in Naruto's memory that she had said something so decisively. And then the blonde suddenly turned pale and, skirting the people gathered around her, jumped out to the railing, looking at how Haim from the Hyuga clan was spitting out the blood. She finally remembered how exactly the battle of these 2 stubborn people went, which ended for her friend in a hospital bed, and for the guy with something like revenge on the main branch of his abnormal clan. However, his hatred and desire, at least in such a childish way, to break system and take revenge, Naru could perfectly understand, because Niji was very much like her, but the kunoichi had no idea who exactly she should take revenge on. At one time, without even thinking that one way or another, almost all of Konoha was to blame for her situation. However, she understood Haim much better, because like her she was at the very bottom, thanks to her father's seal and neglect from the village, so, hang in there, Hinata. Naruto shouted to the entire hall, where people were watching in horror what was happening in the arena, hanging over the railing. She knew that the brunette would lose to her cousin, she knew that the guy was one of the geniuses that are born in clans once every 100 years, but she could not help but support her desire to win, because she knew exactly how Hinata felt about her. Naruto Uzumaki was an idol for the heiress of the Hyuga clan. Naruto Namikaze became the one who at least sometimes spoke to her, encouraged her and gave advice, wanting to pull the girl she became at the very end of the war out much earlier. In the arena, meanwhile, the fight between the members of the Hyuga clan continued, although it ceased to be from the moment when Niji completely blocked the flow of chakra to his cousin, attacking her open points with a soft fist, depriving her of any opportunity to use Juken. Niji mercilessly attacked the bleeding Hinata, who could barely stand on her feet, but was not going to give up, wanting to reach the very end. A direct blow with a soft fist to the solar plexus forced the girl to hang on the arm of her brother, who, it seemed, himself did not fully understand the iron determination of his opponent, but a priori did not want to accept it. "You don't understand anything," Not a single one of your blows reached its target. Throwing Hyuga onto the concrete floor, he threw Niji, confident that this was the end of their fight, because practically no one could get up after that. Naruto, closely following what was happening, completely ignoring the people around her, gritted her teeth and grabbed the railing more tightly, holding back with all her strength. Due to the inability to continue the fight, clearing his throat, Hate spoke, looking with some sadness at the girl, under whom a puddle of blood was slowly spreading. Don't you dare interfere! Unable to bear it, Naruto shouted, seeing how weakly, but Hinata's chakra was circulating, how her fingers trembled with the last of her strength in an attempt to gather strength and rise to her feet. Terrifying fortitude and determination. Everyone turned around sharply, looking disapprovingly at the Hokage's daughter, who was looking at the arena with a menacing look, where Hinata was slowly rising, still not wanting to give up. It was a pity to look at her, but to ignore her determination and spirit would be unfair, and therefore, the fight is not over yet, continue, the Hokage said loudly, with an imperious gesture ordering Hate, who wanted to object, not to interfere for now. Naru, looking at her father, who was confident in his actions, smiled broadly, realizing that he, too, saw a flaring fire in Hinata. Why did you get up? A little more and you'll just die! Niji blurted out, completely ignoring their surroundings, angry at the strange, unusual stubbornness for the weak and indecisive Haim of his clan. We're not done yet. More cheerfully than was expected from her, and Hinata said firmly, looking decisively into the eyes of the enemy, who, for obvious reasons, did not want to continue this battle. There's no point in pretending. I see that you can barely stand, the guy spat out irritably, watching as she tried to stand on shaky legs in a special stance to attack the Hyuga clan. Since birth, you have been burdened with the burden of being the heiress of the clan, which is why you hate yourself for being weak. He continued to speak a little softer, causing Naruto to frown deeply, because this man was trying to suppress, hurt, and trample his sister mentally, which was simply disgusting. But people don't change, such as fate. He chuckled and immediately added, why suffer further? Just give up. No, Niji, Hinata said firmly, wiping the trails of blood from her face with the sleeve of her jacket with a trembling hand. I see something too, brother. It's not me who suffers the most from the fate and disagreements between the branches of the clan, but you, she said with a soft, understanding half-smile, expectedly touching the guy's unhealed callus. The next second Niji took off, wanting to shut up, take revenge, cripple. He clearly didn't realize what exactly he wanted to do, since anger at the heiress of the main branch of his clan overwhelmed the guy, causing him to temporarily lose touch with reality, in which in front of him stood a beaten girl, simply no longer capable of any battle and stupidly saying what was really weighing on his heart, showing sincere concern for the guy. Niji, stop, the fight is over. Hate barked at the same moment, perfectly perceiving his intentions, immediately rushing to intercept the guy's attack. At the same second, Naruto's still loose and tangled hair suddenly rushed forward, echoing the gusts of wind following the three Jounins and the Hokage, who rushed off in order to stop the guy who had lost his temper and decided to kill his already defeated opponent. The next picture that the kunoichi saw simply shocked her consciousness. Niji stood a couple of meters from Hinata, who was fenced off from him by the gloomy Hate, his index finger barely touching his forehead protector. The guy's right and left hands were tightly squeezed by Kurenai and Kakashi, and from behind his student, Guy completely blocked him, tightly grasping him by the shoulders. Minato stood next to the examiner, like his daughter before, with his arms strictly crossed over his chest, looking at the genin, who was still exuding a clear thirst for murder, with an extremely dissatisfied look. Niji, cool down, you promised me not to lose my head about this. Quiet. To what extent was this possible, given Guy's character? He said directly into the guy's ear, trying to bring him to his senses. Why did the rest of the Jounin interfere? And even the Hokage? The guy muttered, still keeping his Byakugan active. Or is there special treatment for the main branch? He asked caustically, pouring out in these words all his anger and hatred at the rotten system of their damn clan. How disappointing! Without allowing the others to open their mouths, Minato said in a steely tone, piercing the shy boy with his gaze. However, he didn't have time to say what exactly was disappointing him, because the girl standing behind them shuddered, turned pale, and slowly began to sag, coughing up large clots of blood. "Hinata!" Instantly releasing Niji from her grip, her mentor, Kurenai, shouted, rushing to her ward, bent over in pain. Naruto, no longer able to tolerate what was happening from the outside, jumped over the railing, jumping from the balcony, followed by the girl, Lee, and, which was extremely suspicious, Sasuke and Shikamaru. "Hey friend, how are you?" Jumping up to the girl, the Hokage's daughter asked very softly, carefully lifting her head from the floor. "Her complexion is not healthy at all." Sasuke chuckled under Shiki's strange, frowning gaze. "I'm afraid to imagine the state of Hinata's body and internal organs now," said the future head of the Nara clan, watching as the girl in the arms of his friend gradually passed out. "Hey Lista!" Niji suddenly called out to Naruto, turning to her as the medical ninjas were loading the victim onto a stretcher. "I'll tell you two things, Naruto-sama." Making sure that she paid attention to him, the guy said, not understanding why he even spoke to the one who for some reason did not leave his thoughts during 2 stages of the exam. Either he wanted to get her approval, or to explain his actions and justify his aggression. In a strange way, for some reason he was very worried about the opinion of the Hokage's daughter about what happened and her fight with Hinata, as well as the opinion of the head of their village. "If you consider yourself a shinobi, there is no point in rooting for others," he said, and without letting the girl open her mouth, added, "Losers will always remain, so fate cannot be changed." Dad was right, disappointing. Looking straight into his eyes, the girl muttered, with the last of her strength restraining the desire to prove to him right now how a former loser can change, bringing to her knees a recognized genius who owns one of the 3 great Dijitsu. "Let's stop there, we need to finish the intermediate stage." Interrupting all the bickering, the Hokage said, without even looking at the guy who spoke so boldly in relation to his daughter, who again, in some incomprehensible way, managed to find herself in the thick of things. "Let's go, Naruto." Placing his hand on his friend's shoulder, he extended it to Shikamaru, pulling her towards the stairs to the balcony. The girl, without saying anything, turned away from the guy still looking at her, wanting to leave the arena, but, remembering Hinata's face and Kurenai's look, who clearly understood that Niji really wanted to kill her student, she could not stand it. "If we meet in the finals, I will not spare you, Niji, be prepared to pay for your words." Turning around, she threw such a look that even Guy, standing next to his student, shuddered. "And then I will make you understand that fate and fate are just nonsense that drive people into limits." The daughter of the Hokage gave away, and swaying slightly, turned back, picking up Shikamaru and Sasuke, who had approached them, by the arms, and with an uncertain gait headed back to the balcony, again feeling weakness throughout her body. Slowly climbing the stairs, Naruto exhaled sharply, feeling a certain bitterness that remained as an unpleasant viscous residue on her heart after what happened in the arena. Moreover, she again lost her temper in public, saying something that shouldn't have been said, just like in the Land of Waves. But the kunoichi simply could not remain silent in such a situation, especially considering the fact that her voice of reason, in the person of one harmful nine-tailed demon, pacifying his hot-tempered Jinchuriki, was temporarily not in his rightful place. But even so, what she said to Niji might make him think about his actions and attitude towards life even before their battle in the finale, by which the kunoichi planned to shake off some new technique from her godfather and achieve the weakening of Minato's seal on the cage caudate. Moreover, ideally the girl dreamed of getting the key to it, but knowing her daddy too well, she understood perfectly well that this would not happen before the start of the war. And then, in the best-case scenario, Naruto! Someone slightly hesitantly called out to the completely slowed procession from the village of the Hidden Leaf, which Haim was thinking about. The girl, so brazenly pulled out of her thoughts, blinked in surprise, looked at her friends incomprehensibly, and all 3 turned to the one who called the blonde so strangely. In the middle of the stairs stood none other than Gaara's older brother, and contrary to the tone with which he called, he smiled confidently and looked exactly at the kunoichi, while completely ignoring the guys standing on either side of her. "Can we talk a little?" The puppeteer asked surprisingly calmly and respectfully, still pretending not to notice a couple of Konoha genin looking at him disapprovingly. Yes? Not quite understanding what they wanted from her, the girl responded, releasing the hands of her friends who were clearly dissatisfied with her decision, indicating with a gesture that everything was fine. Did you want something? When the guy stood up and Shikamaru and Sasuke had moved a sufficient distance away, Naruto asked curiously. No. You're just an interesting girl, Naruto, unusual. The guy grinned somehow strangely and cheerfully, leaning on the railing next to her, watching Hate begin the selection for the penultimate fight. If you like unusual people, then this is for him. Mirroring his grin, his interlocutor drawled ironically, pointing at Lee, who at that moment was too furiously assuring everyone around him that he supposedly did not want to participate in the next battle, and in general, he would rather be in the last pair. Although, that guy is also extremely interesting. Pointing to Rock Chuji standing a little further away, shouting, "Give meat!" to the whole hall, she laughed openly. This is probably too much. The guy laughed, watching the girl stand not far from him, leaning on the fence, and finally getting ready for a long conversation. Actually, that's exactly what he wanted. Learn more about his rivals and in particular about this strange girl who immediately captivated his younger brother. Although, of course, carried away, as it turned out, is not the right word, since with this blonde the one-tailed Jinchuriki, who was famous for his bad character since childhood, behaved like a protector. What was the cost of his presentation before the start of the first stage? Or a stern look that promises slow death to the second examiner? Kankuro then sincerely rejoiced at the appearance of the Hokage, albeit a rather specific one, because only this saved that woman from almost instant death in Sabaka-Soso. So yes, the word, carried away, was completely inappropriate here, especially considering the fact that he didn't pay any attention to the hugs and other nonsense that was pouring out from this Wrongheim. It looks like Gaara will be fighting next. Already without a smile, Naruto said warily even before the signs stopped, interrupting the guy's thoughts with her words. And literally simultaneously with this phrase, his younger brother appeared in a whirlwind of sand right in the middle of the arena. The problem was that he was definitely on edge, wanting someone else's blood, and Kankuro clearly saw this in Gaara's gaze, having studied his facial expressions well over the past years. Come here. In complete silence, even before the announcement of the opponents, the future Kazekage drawled, with his gaze as if searching for his opponent. Although Chuji's loud cry, notifying everyone that he was temporarily saved, and Lee's ranting about his cunning and the law of meanness, slightly diluted the oppressive atmosphere, making it lighter and mocking for a while. Kankuro, right? The blonde whispered quietly, looking blankly at the arena. Has he always been like this? Turning sharply to her interlocutor, she asked, as if trying to look into the guy's soul. Since childhood, Gaara had big problems with communication and expression of emotions. The eldest son of the Kazekage answered vaguely, clearly not daring to talk about the beiges sealed in his brother. And in his character he took after our father, the guy said, hinting at his temper and lack of restraint. Naruto squeezed the metal bar harder, sincerely believing that the members of his family were most to blame for the way her friend and brother in misfortune had become. I talked about loneliness, interrupting Kankuro, who was already ready to say something else. The kunoichi explained, looking again at the arena, where a couple of fighters were already standing, glaring at each other. The guy next to her shuddered, not expecting to hear something like that from a stranger who knew absolutely nothing about their village and laws, and stared at the girl's sad profile. This is all too complicated, he said, simply not daring to reveal to a person from an unfriendly village the way of life and mistakes of another village, but still added, as children, Temari and I sincerely tried to make friends, but because of we simply couldn't get close enough to him for this. It's good that you at least tried, the girl next to him suddenly sang warmly and, having waited for the announcement of the start of the fight, stood with her feet on the bottom crossbar, extended her fist forward, and shouted to the whole arena, Lee, Gaara, show your class. Be careful. The guy hissed, grabbing the staggering Naruto's hand, with which she was holding onto the railing, feeling how curious glances of other people were gathering at their small company. "Let's start the 9th battle," loudly announced Hate, who had previously been interrupted by the Hokage's daughter, to the surprise of many, encouraging both rivals. The battle was fast-paced, like all of Rock Lee's battles. But Naruto, who was still slightly dizzy due to extreme fatigue and stagnation of chakra, could not follow the movements of the guy in green tights, reacting to them only when Konoha Senpu reached Gaara's Suna no Tate. Lee's punches don't land at all. The kunoichi chuckled, knowing perfectly well the reason, but for some reason wanting to maintain a dialogue with the guy standing next to her. Physical attacks will not affect Gaara. Sand protects him regardless of his desires. Kankuro spoke in tone with her, carefully watching the movements of the boy from Leaf. "That's why, until today, no one has even managed to scratch my brother," he said in a strange tone, quickly glancing at the distracted girl who was having difficulty following the battle. "This Lee would be better off using genjutsu or, as a last resort, ninjutsu. Unfortunately, he can only use taijutsu," Naruto responded, finally catching the guy's movements. "What?" Kankuro asked, dumbfounded, involuntarily taking his gaze away from the battle and turning it to an absolutely serious girl, who was clearly waiting for something. "Take it off, Lee." Might Guy, standing next to the head of the Hidden Leaf Village, said loudly with his thumb extended forward, drawing the attention of everyone present, including a couple of opponents, for a moment. "But Guy-sensei, you said that only when I protect people dear to me," the guy responded uncertainly, landing on one of the fingers of the stone statue. "It's okay, I allow it," Guy shouted, flashing his signature smile, and Lee literally beamed, quickly sitting down on a stone. Then the guy pulled down his orange leg warmers, revealing to everyone the weights with the kanji for perseverance written on them, taking them off with a slight movement. "Now something will happen," Naruto said in anticipation, leaning forward slightly to better see what was happening. Kankuro, already ready to respond ironically to her words, looked in disbelief at how much dust and destruction the arena brought with a pair of weights released from Rock's hands, which had previously been hanging on his legs. "Go ahead, Lee," his sensei commanded, and the guy in a bright green tights literally disappeared from sight, only to strike Gaara on the head with Konoha Senpu within just a couple of seconds. Everyone around froze in anticipation, with difficulty trying to catch the movements of the genin Leaf, who, blow after blow, was moving closer and closer to the body of the fighter from Suna. "This guy, Rock Lee, he's a master of taijutsu," Naruto shouted in delight as he watched his blow from the Konoha Sashu finally pass, leaving a deep gash on the right cheek of the Kazakage's youngest son. "Can't be," Kankuro said in shock, as did the girl, leaning forward a little, looking in surprise at her wounded brother. Against the background of what was happening, Guy's voice resounded again, and the guy standing next to the blonde still looked in amazement at how one attack after another simply passed, injuring Gaara, until the sand from his face began to slowly crumble. "That's bad," Kankuro said sadly, roughly imagining what could happen if his brother completely lost his mind. And judging by his crazy expression peeking out from under the crumbling Suna no Yoroi, things were heading straight towards this. "If Gaara gets his hands on this guy, then he will kill him just to have fun," he said dryly, briefly glancing at his silent interlocutor, expecting to see fear or shock on her face. But what he saw there was something else. A certain mixture of anxiety and worry, directed not at Lee, but at his brother. "And it's all?" Gaara inquired ominously quietly, causing slight surprise on Rock's face. However, after a couple of moments his expression changed, and his lips curled into a modest but quite confident smile, clearly showing that he had a plan. "Lotus," Naruto said quietly as she watched Lee quickly unwind her bandages, essentially seeing this technique for the first time in this life. "Come on, I'm waiting." Continuously watching his opponent, Gaara ironically gave out, as if giving him the opportunity to attack. Rock smiled expectantly and again disappeared from everyone's sight. A sharp blow to the jaw, throwing the victim up, followed by another series of blows, because of the sand, his opponent, despite his slight physique, was extremely heavy. And then something happened that Naruto had not noticed in her past life. realizing what was happening only when Lee's attack failed. Gaara, taking advantage of the moment when Rock closed his eyes, feeling pain from overexertion, evaporated, leaving only empty sand armor in his place, automatically making all subsequent actions of the enemy a meaningless waste of strength and health. Sadly, the girl whispered, covering her eyes because of the dust that filled the entire arena and concrete chips that flew up from the pressure that appeared after the impact. "Are you kidding?" Kankuro snorted, obviously interpreting the kunoichi's words in his own way. Enthusiastic cries were heard from all sides, deciding that this beautiful and deadly attack was successful, and his interlocutor only frowned. "You didn't understand me." Gaara escaped from Lee's captivity, Naruto said, surprising the guy with these words, and looked towards her father and Kakashi, who, unlike the others, were serious, clearly noticing the same thing as her. Actually, the girl herself felt rather than notice Gaara's movement, simply expecting it. For the kunoichi's very condition still left much to be desired. The chakra was not restored, which is why the body was feverish and aching, and the brain literally refused to work, slowly processing information from the outside. A terrible state, especially considering the absence of Kurama, who would definitely figure out how to cheer up his Jinchuriki. Well, or would share a drop of his chakra. In fact, without her tailed tenant, Naruto could not even take advantage of the absorption of natural energy, since the Nine Tails was working with her, and she herself, before her visit to Mount Myaboku, could not do anything, because special training was needed to complete the Sage Mode. In the arena, meanwhile, Lee saw the destroyed sand armor, and right behind him, Gaara appeared from the sand as a menacing shadow with a creepy smile. And the beating began, as Rock, who used a moat range, could barely move due to pain, and his opponent, who had lost his common sense, was simply playing with the victim. "This is no longer normal," Naruto hissed angrily, not knowing who she was more worried about, for the crazy Gaara or Lee, not far behind him, taking blow after blow with a wide smile. It was painful to watch them fight, so, "Hey, you there, fight like normal people." Unable to bear it, the kunoichi screamed, deciding for the last time to try to reach the youngest son of the Kazekage and putting on the line not only the opportunity to be a shinobi, but also his life. But for the girl herself, her spontaneous actions, dictated by anger and disappointment, backfired no less. Her head began to spin again, like a carousel, and a lump formed in her throat, consisting of her stomach and a couple of other organs. Her legs gave way, and she literally fell into the arms of Kankuro, who looked in shock first at her, then at the slightly confused Gaara, who seemed to have regained some part of his sanity. But a second later, the puppeteer, under the stern gaze of his brother and father with the girl's mentor, somehow carefully grabbed her by the waist, preventing her from falling or sliding to the floor, mentally surprised at how fragile and miniature this Naruto turned out to be for a strong kunoichi. In the arena, after the Hokage's daughter fell, on the verge of consciousness in Kankuro's arms, something very strange began to happen. The rivals, as if inspired by her far from encouraging cry, gathered and, glaring at each other, began to act. Gaara gathered all the sand from the arena around him, preparing to attack the enemy again, and Lee, folding his arms crosswise on his chest, released an incredible amount of energy, which with its power crumbled the concrete under his feet into dust. Kankuro blinked and, comfortably grabbing the carcass of his burden, which, to be honest, he most wanted to throw away, squinted slightly, trying to understand what kind of technique this was. Rock Lee's skin turned red, the veins on his temples bulged, as if at that moment the guy was experiencing just hellish pain. Even Gaara stopped, watching with curiosity and some shock what was happening to his opponent. But nothing ended there, and Lee, growling sharply, bent over and released even more energy. Swollen veins covered the guy's forehead, and a thin thread of blood appeared from his nose. This sight was beginning to be truly frightening, because this genin from the Leaf Village suddenly turned out to be an even bigger monster than his brother. And then he simply disappeared, appearing next to Gaara for a moment to deliver a crushing blow, thanks to which he literally soared up, raising a whole hurricane of wind, his sand, dust, and concrete crumbs. A terrifying sight, especially when his brother began to be kicked in the air like some kind of inflatable rubber ball. The fifth gate, they said quietly over Kankuro's ear, and a fragile arm wrapped around his neck, leaning. These muscles are already torn from tension. The girl chuckled, seeing perfectly well that, unlike Gaara, this crazy person decided to go to the end. Although the fact that her brother in misfortune did not lose himself may smooth out the ending, because what happened to Lee that time was terrible. Meanwhile, the battle reached its climax. Hooray for Renge! An incredibly fast blow, due to which the bones in Rock's hand crunched and possibly crumbled, and then Gaara's rapid fall, which lasted at most hundredths of a second, ending in the complete destruction of the arena. But Naruto's old friend was smart, and unlike his impulsive girlfriend, thought quickly even in the most stalemate situations. His gourd, crumbling into grains of sand an instant before touching the concrete of the guy's back, softened the fall, minimizing the damage. However, even so, Gaara suffered more than he initially expected, so, without hesitation, he used Sabaka-Q to catch his practically immobilized opponent and… Naruto closed her eyes, burying her face in Kankuro's face, clutching his clothes with her free hand up to her white knuckles, simply not wanting to see how a couple of people dear to her mutilate each other. Announce the end, otherwise I will use Sabaka Soso and this guy will die. There's no way out of my sandy coffin, especially in this condition. Gaara drawled hoarsely. Naru turned around in disbelief and blinked a couple of times, slowly realizing that Lee, instead of crushed limbs, was simply covered in sand, completely shackling the guy. The winner is Gaara! With the silent consent of the Hokage, Hate announced loudly. It was a spectacular fight. Both opponents showed their best sides. Watching how the sand slowly returns to the pumpkin at the behest of its owner and carefully lowers Lee onto the ruined concrete floor, Minato said, glad that he did not have to interfere. Whatever one may say, he saw with his own eyes the corpses left by the children of the race after the second stage of the exam. So, but, as in life, there must be a loser here too. I hope this will be good training for him, he said as Guy jumped down and helped the medic Neen load his student onto the carrier. Okay, I'll probably go to my people, the girl said, giggling stupidly, trying to let go of the puppeteer, but was stopped by his hand, which grabbed the palm on his shoulder. What? Where are you going in this state, Naruto? The guy grinned, surprised at his actions. I'll help you get there and hand you over personally into the hands of the Hokage. Otherwise, I'm afraid I'll be quartered. He laughed, covering his concern for her with the safety of his own life.